Have you ever felt pushed aside by your family? Like you're the only one that ever seems to be ignored, criticized, or blamed for everything that goes wrong? If so, you may have experienced family scapegoating. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, what is family scapegoating? And I'm going to talk about 7 signs of scapegoating the family in a family system. I'll also help you understand why scapegoating results in such deep psychological and emotional wounds. In our journey of healing from narcissistic type parenting styles, addressing and healing narcissistic wounds from being the scapegoat of the family is critical to addressing all our wounded parts. As a trauma therapist, I've witnessed the transformative power of emotional healing, and definitely addressing our wounded parts resulting from having narcissistic type parents is crucial to our well-being, to our future relationships, and to our ability to succeed in the world. I know firsthand how important it is to address the part of us that was alienated and scapegoated due to our parents' unwillingness or inability to do their own emotional healing. Before we get into the 7 signs of scapegoating that I want to get into today, I want to give you some foundational information about scapegoating and what it means to be scapegoated. Family scapegoating happens in families when a child in the family is targeted and blamed for the family problems. This is usually done as a means of deflecting attention from the real conflict within the home or the family, or from the parent within the family who is actually the real problem because of maybe mental health issues, maybe because of substance abuse issues, or maybe because that person might be abusive or have emotional problems such as raging, depression, or something to that effect. For example, an alcoholic parent, the abusive parent, or the cheating parent. Family scapegoating is a phenomenon where one family member, usually a child, is targeted as the scapegoat, which means unfairly blamed, criticized, and treated as the family's designated troublemaker, the one with the attitude or the one with the real problems, quote unquote, real problems. Scapegoats often feel isolated, misunderstood, and they wonder why they're getting picked on, alienated, or why the family doesn't care for them. They're often left to feel intense feelings of shame, guilt, and abandonment. The scapegoat is often gaslit and made to feel crazy, while the person with the real problematic or abusive behaviors gets away with what they're doing. At my agency, we do a lot of work with foster kids, and one of the worst ways that I've seen this happen is in sexual abuse cases where the child who is being sexually abused, oftentimes maybe even a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl, she speaks up about sexual abuse happening to her maybe by a father, by a stepfather, by an uncle, by her brother, or by a grandfather. And she might tell her mother what's going on, and her mother turns and says to her, either forget about it, you'll get over it, or even worse, says, well, it's your fault for walking around with little shorts. You shouldn't be walking around like that, and turns around and blames the child for the sexual abuse. So in other words, that child is being scapegoated while the perpetrator in the family is left to do whatever it is that they want to do, and they continue to do the abuse, not only on the child that came to our agency, for example, but that person is free to continue to do abuse on others. For the most part, the scapegoat bears the weight of everyone else's problems. They carry the weight of dysfunction within the family as they are constantly blamed for everything, especially if they are the ones who speak up against the narcissistic or abusive parents. If this is the first time we meet, my name is Saraina Moore, and I am a licensed psychotherapist in the state of Florida. I make these videos to provide psychoeducation on the effects of emotional childhood trauma, relationships, healing, and personal transformation to help people live more fulfilling lives. I believe that it doesn't matter what you've been through, what has happened to you, even what you've done to yourself. When you choose the healing and transformational growth journey, your life could completely change, and you could become the actual creator of your life. Instead of living in reaction, you could choose to live in creation. So if you want to learn more about how psychological wounds affect our lives and our relationships, hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you could be the first to know every time I upload a video. So let's dive into the 7 signs of scapegoating. Now, I want you to know that these are not in order of importance, nor are they the only signs of scapegoating. As a matter of fact, after you hear me, or as you start hearing what I have to say regarding the different points, go ahead and let me know if you could think of any other ways a child is scapegoated, and also that child continues to be scapegoated as they go from being school-age kids to maybe teenagers to young adults and even grown adults. Okay, so number 1 is consistent blame. Being consistently blamed is the most common characteristic of a family scapegoat, sorry. Blame is an unrelenting and pervasive pattern where the targeted individual is wrongfully held accountable for the family issues, for the family's conflicts, for the family's disputes. Regardless of their involvement in the problem, the family scapegoat gets blamed for everything. Now, blame can show up in different ways. One way is literally being blamed and being told that they're the ones that messed up everything, or they're the ones that caused the problem. Another way of expressing blame is by saying, wow, you make such a big deal about everything. You always mess things up. Also being treated with contempt when they bring up a grievance, and the parent rolling their eyes, saying, here you go again, you're always trying to mess things up, that sort of thing. That's a way of blaming also. Also being blamed for the lack of emotional control of a parent. So say a child does their normal things, because it's normal for children to make mistakes. Let's say a child makes a mistake, maybe drops a cup of milk, and one of the parents loses complete control and maybe goes irate or goes into a rage. The child is then blamed for the parents raging. So being blamed for a parent's emotional state is also very common. Being blamed for parental discord, being blamed for parental conflicts, being blamed when in that same example, the child spilled the milk, the father becomes irate and goes into a rage, then the mom maybe perhaps tries to intervene or maybe protect the child or something like that. And then all of a sudden the mom and dad are fighting because the mom stepped in because the father was out of control. That leaves the child not only feeling guilty and feeling ashamed and feeling like it's his fault, but perhaps when the father takes off and leaves, perhaps then the mom actually turns around and says, if you wouldn't have spilled the milk, none of this would have happened. So that's another way of where a child is blamed. Okay, so what are some long-term effects of blaming on the scapegoat? Blame can be highly damaging and have a significant, long-lasting impact on the child. It affects their emotional, psychological, and social well-being. The child being scapegoated in this case often experiences overwhelming feelings of frustration, confusion, guilt, shame, emotional abandonment, and isolation. Children like these carry a heavy burden of responsibility for problems beyond their control and not initiated by them. And how does this look when this child turns into an adult and is in a relationship? More than likely, in the example that I gave, more than likely, this is someone who will grow up to feel like they're responsible for other people's emotions. They're responsible for keeping the peace. This is where people pleasing comes from. People pleasing isn't, you're not just born a people pleaser, you become a people pleaser through reinforcement within the family. So imagine the scenario I gave you a little while ago. If that were to continue to happen day in and day out all the time, this kid is literally being groomed to become a people pleaser and to become someone who feels like they are responsible for others' emotions. So do you know someone like this? Is this hitting home for anyone? Do you know someone like this? Maybe even yourself? Or it's familiar because we all know someone like this. We all know someone who's trying to keep the peace and not cause any waves. And when someone is upset, they're the first ones to jump in and try to fix things. This is exactly how that situation is birthed. Number 2 is isolation and alienation. Isolation and alienation represent the social and relational consequences of being unfairly targeted within the family unit. Often this is experienced as the silent treatment, also known as stonewalling. So that means being ignored for hours or days at a time, not having grievances addressed, not being spoken to as a form of punishment, not being answered when they have a question. They may be excluded from decisions, activities, or conversations. They may become the topic of discussion among family members, described as the one who is problematic and troubled in some way. So imagine this happening to a child. Let's just call the child little Johnny. Imagine little Johnny being the scapegoat of the type of family where I talked about earlier, where the father is raging, but now let's add that the father also is an alcoholic. Let's say that the father, when the milk spilled, goes into a rage and then uses that as an excuse to leave the house and go drinking and go on a binge, and then comes back angry as well, then causes more problems for the mom. Imagine how little Johnny would feel when he's told that it's his fault, that because he spilled the milk, now dad is upset and now he went drinking because of him. And now imagine that happening over and over and over again, year after year, and little Johnny growing up and becoming a middle school kid. Imagine that happening. But then it's also mom being like a co-narcissist with the dad, or a co-alcoholic with the dad, because she's also blaming little Johnny. And it could be that she doesn't know what else to do. But just imagine this dynamic and this type of family system. This is just one example, guys. So let's talk about the effects of isolation and alienation for the scapegoat. Alienation and isolation leave the child feeling emotionally abandoned. And that you can see clearly as I talk about little Johnny and what he's experiencing. The whole family is abandoning him. The whole family is looking down upon him and blaming him. And then if other children in the home are treated differently, it leaves the scapegoat feeling like an outsider, like he doesn't belong. It fills him with feelings of sadness, guilt, helplessness, and shame. The effects of isolation and alienation can be profound, shaping the scapegoat's perception of themselves and their place within the family, their place within a group of people. Imagine little Johnny going to school and how he must feel. He continues to have the identity of the person who's being pushed aside, of the person that isn't good enough, of the person who messes everything up. So this continues to affect the formation of his identity, and it creates a lot of codependency and even a victim mentality. Of course, there's different ways that individuals respond to the same exact situation. So I'm describing the way little Johnny responded, but there could be Stacy. Stacy could be responding in a completely different way. Stacy could rebel, talk back, become angry, fight. So different people could be exposed to the same situation, but that doesn't mean that they're going to respond or react or form the same exact identity. Often we see that in the cases that we see here at my agency, where there's a group of kids. Let's say there's 3 kids within the same family. They all could have experienced very, very similar experiences within the family, but they're each different and they each respond in a different way. If this is clicking for you, let me know in the comments below what feelings are coming up for you when you're hearing the story of little Johnny and him being scapegoated. Okay, number 3 is negative projections. Negative projections are when a family member projects their feelings, their thoughts, even their identity onto the scapegoat. So for example, let's say a family where the mom tends to be very critical, very selfish. A lot of what the mom wants to do is what she wants to do and what's best for her, but not necessarily what's best for the children. So that, let's say in that home, there's a 15-year-old daughter called Stephanie who's had to live with this mother who decides everything needs to be the way that she wants it to be because she's very preoccupied with how things make her look. And then let's say Stephanie decides to start becoming who she really is, and she dares to stand up to her mom and say no to some demand that her mom may have. In this situation, the mom could turn around and say, "Stephanie, you're so selfish. All you do is think about yourself." So in that situation, the scapegoat is Stephanie, and the mom is projecting her own traits onto Stephanie. Stephanie may find herself being held responsible for behaviors and issues that belong to the mother, not to her, or having the thoughts that the mother has. And again, it's the same thing that I explained earlier. In one situation, a child might rebel and might start fighting with mom and standing up to her. In another situation, the child might actually internalize the mom's thoughts and beliefs of her. And she might start describing herself as, "I'm selfish. I always think about myself." And many times I see that when clients come to therapy and we hear them describe themselves in such negative ways, and I instantly say, whose voice is that? Is that your voice, or has someone told you that? And very often when I ask that question, they're like, no, that's what my mom always says, or that's what my parents always say about me. So the effects of negative projections on the scapegoat are very intense and very severe as well, especially if it's an ongoing issue. It could definitely affect the identity formation of that child. It could affect their self-image. It could affect the way they view themselves in the world. It affects their self-esteem and feelings of self-worth. Very often, by the way, this is also a form of psychological abuse and emotional abuse. All of these are actually psychological and emotional abuse. And what I want you to know that ongoing, this causes major trauma and major wounds. However, since these are invisible, we don't see them. Since these are invisible, we don't even take them serious. But this is very serious. It affects our thinking, the way we feel, the way we behave, and just the way that we function in the world. It affects our relationships with others. It affects what we think we deserve from others, what we expect in relationships, our standards in relationships. It affects everything all around. The constant barrage of blame and negative projection can lead to frustration, powerlessness, and an inability to defend oneself. So imagine this person growing up and becoming an adult in a romantic relationship. Just them being able to set limits and set boundaries with others is very difficult, because when this situation happens, people don't really learn to set boundaries. In these type of families, boundaries aren't even something that's reinforced. What's reinforced is people pleasing and saying yes and becoming what the parent needs you to become. Number 4 is unequal treatment. Scapegoats often receive differential treatment compared to other kids in the family, whether it's being blamed for issues beyond their control or they're being punished in ways that the other children are not being punished. Due to minor things, the unequal treatment reinforces a sense of injustice and makes them feel more and more like a victim. It could also happen in families where there's physical abuse or sexual abuse, where that one child that's being targeted is the one that's being sexually abused or is being mostly physically abused. The unfair expectation creates constant no-win situations for the kid. And imagine in a situation where, let's say Maria is the one that's being targeted for either sexual abuse or physical abuse. And when that's one way that she's being targeted and being treated differently. But then imagine her speaking up about it, complaining about it, asking for help about it. And then she's told, let it go. It happened to me. I hear that a lot, guys. I hear that a lot here. It happened to me and I got over it. Why can't you just get over it? Don't make such a big deal. That is another way where this child is experiencing a sense, reinforcing a sense of injustice, but also she's continuously victimized. And guys, this happens all the time. It happens all the time. It's very common, more common than you could imagine. That's why trauma, complex trauma, and adverse childhood experiences are at a pandemic level. There's so many children being raised in situations where they very often experience 3, 4, and 5 different types of adverse childhood experiences. So it's so important to be armed with this information. And by the way, this is just a little side note, but it's so important to be armed with this information because it gives you the power to be an agent of change. It gives you the power to recognize when things are happening, because you too could also feel like what you're seeing is maybe you're wrong about what you're seeing. Should I be involved? Should I say something? I'm not really sure. When you start watching videos like these and you start learning, then you're able to label behaviors and label things, and then you feel less crazy about what you're looking at. Then you realize that what you're looking at is what you think it is. All right, so what are the effects of unequal treatment on the scapegoat? Unequal treatment may lead to resentment, frustration, and a perception that the scapegoat is singled out for punishment, leading to a perpetual sense of failure and helplessness. So the scapegoated child, in the case of Maria, we said little Johnny, we said all these different kids. In the case of all these different kids, that they're being treated unequal to the rest of the children, or, in a differential way, these children end up believing that they deserve to be treated this way, that things will never go right for them, that when they ask for help, no one's coming. How many times do we hear adults say that? Why ask for help? Because no one's coming. Well, this is how it begins. This is how it begins. These kids really believe that if they ask for help, no one's coming. And it's just a family culture where truly no one is coming. And I've seen it where, unfortunately, sometimes it starts with the adults treating these kids different in a negative way. But then if there's siblings, the siblings also start doing the same. And now the whole family turns against this one child who's usually the one who is really actually being abused in whatever way, whether it's physically, sexually, or psychologically and emotionally. This type of child may come to believe that they are inherently undeserving of fair treatment and that they're destined to face obstacles and challenges in life, that life is just hard and they just have to, just put up with it. And I find that it's such a common thing with clients that come to therapy, especially clients that have codependency. They feel like they have to endure. They give so many chances. They talk so much, they over-explain, and they do all of this and never win. And it's because they feel like they have to endure. They never know when to draw the line in the sand and say, never again, not one more. They give 101 chances. And then if something else happens, they'll give the 102nd chance as well. So there's a negative internalized belief that they have to endure and that they should endure because actually that's what was told to them. That was told to them that they have to endure. This negative internalized belief system becomes a significant barrier to cultivating a positive self-image and pursuing personal goals and feeling like they're worth it and they're going to be able to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. And this is where what's born in them is to be the reactors and be reactive in their life rather than to be the creators of their life. And one thing I want to teach everyone on my channel, on this channel, is I want to teach everyone to be the creators of our lives. We have the power to create our life despite what has happened to us. Please let me know in the comments if this is hitting home for you, if this is reminding you of someone, if you think of any other ways now that we're talking about this. Are there any other ways that you feel people get scapegoated that I haven't hit on yet? All right, now we're getting into number 5. Number 5 is manipulation. Manipulation is another sign of scapegoating and a tool used within the family dynamic. Manipulation tactics are often used by family members to marginalize, further, and control the scapegoat. A few tools that real great manipulators use constantly, pretty much to put you into submission, to get you to do exactly what they want you to do, to get you to think exactly what they want you to think, say what they want you to say, or also not do what they don't want you to do. That's another reason why people use manipulation to get you into submission. Some manipulation tactics are gaslighting and triangulation, and those two I'm going to talk about today. Often manipulation is attempted to get the scapegoat to comply to unrealistic demands or beliefs. So effects of manipulation. Manipulation tactics, especially gaslighting, can lead to confusion and self-doubt for the scapegoat. The whole point of gaslighting is to make you feel crazy and make you doubt your reality. They may begin by questioning your reality, leading to a sense of powerlessness or emotional distress. Manipulation can exacerbate the emotional turmoil experienced by the scapegoat and can trigger feelings of guilt, shame, inadequacy, and intensify the emotional burden the child carries. Manipulation often results in increased isolation and scapegoating. Manipulation causes a child to feel so much guilt and so much shame because actually guilting a child is, or an individual, is also a form of manipulation. If the child is guilted enough, and think about yourself, think about your life. If you were raised in a home where, I know everyone viewing this wasn't raised in a home with a narcissistic parent or a parent with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, but if you were, I think you'll really understand this one, because guilting is one of the strongest ways that a narcissistic parent gets their child to do what they want them to do. Guilting and gaslighting, criticism, contempt, all of those are tools to use in manipulation, and they destroy the child's identity. They destroy the child's sense of individualism. It destroys their feelings of self-worth and their self-esteem. Gaslighting is a tool, like I said earlier, it's a tool used by manipulators to help you question your reality, to help you question that what you're thinking, feeling, and seeing is actually real. So let's say in the case of where I was speaking earlier about, I think I said a name like Stephanie. Let's say that name, the child that was getting sexually abused. Let's say the child was getting sexually abused by her grandfather. And the mother says, you know what, the same thing happened to me. Don't say anything, just drop it. It'll stop. You'll forget about it. And if you do, you're gonna make your grandmother feel, this will kill your grandmother. That is major, major guilt used to get the child to not speak up. And imagine the burden that the child is carrying when the real culprit there is the grandfather. I could sense this, you listeners, I could sense your anger because I'm feeling it too. and this is, I've seen this happen so many times, and it is so frustrating for us, the therapists, to deal with this. But it happens. It happens very often, and it usually does happen in situations where the parent who is being confided in, the same thing happened to them, and they chose to do nothing, or they were told the same exact words that they're now telling their child. Often gaslighting is used to make them not only doubt their reality, but also to doubt their perception and even their sanity. It is a particularly insidious form of emotional manipulation that could have profound effects on the scapegoat's mental and emotional well-being. And the effects of gaslighting on the scapegoat, is this is a child who then grows up to be an adult who doesn't trust themselves. They don't trust their senses. They don't trust that what they're seeing, feeling, and perceiving is real. They need a lot of validation. And we all know people like this. It might even be us, that you need so much validation. You ask 20 people before making a decision and still don't make a decision. These are the effects of being gaslit, to where you're not really trusting yourself, and you never learned to trust yourself. You also never learned to take care of yourself and defend yourself. You actually created the opposite, which is helplessness. It creates a human that doesn't know how to trust themselves and their perception, and they don't know how to take care of themselves. Those who experience gaslighting, persistent gaslighting, also experience emotional distress, such as high anxiety, high depression, a lot of worry. Also, these children are at high risk for being bullied and may continue to involve themselves in abusive relationships, always doubting their better judgment. Number 7 is triangulation. Triangulation is something I see very, very often also in my experience, my professional experience, where the adult brings in a third party, such as us, to side with them, which often it doesn't end well, and the parent ends up taking the child out of therapy because they didn't get what they wanted. They wanted us to side with them. They wanted us to say that they're right and the child is wrong. And of course, we're not going to do something like that. But triangulation is a tactic where a third party is introduced into the relationship or conflict to create tension, division, and confusion. The manipulator, often a parent or other family member, brings in a third party, such as a friend, another family member, a professional, or pretty much the auntie, the grandmother. They just bring in someone to strengthen their case against the scapegoat. Often in these situations, the manipulator, or the parent, the narcissistic parent who is trying to scapegoat the child, presents themselves as the victim, or rationalizes a lot of their behaviors while minimizing or attacking the child's behaviors. What's important here is to understand that triangulation is a tactic used to divert attention away from the real problem, away from the real problem parents or the parents' behaviors. Whether those behaviors are abuse behaviors, or substance abuse issues, or mental health issues, or even problems within the dynamic of the couple, such as a parent may be cheating, or there's abuse within the couple. So the purpose of the triangulation is to divert attention away from the real problem, and then everyone focuses on this child who is believed to be the problem. And actually many times the child could become a problem. Many times this child has been scapegoated for so long where they're actually becoming a problem. They're actually either getting depressed, anxious, cutting themselves, trying to attempt suicide, or they might become very aggressive, rebellious. They show up to therapy as the child with oppositional defiant disorder, but it really isn't that. It really is something else. It really is that the family is so dysfunctional that how can we expect a child to be functional if they're living within a home where there's so much dysfunction? So that is also something very common that we as therapists have to deal with in these situations with families that scapegoat a child. So the effects of triangulation on the scapegoat. The scapegoat may experience long-lasting effects on their self-esteem, their self-worth, the development of their personality, the development of their identity of who they are, their ability to create trusting and meaningful relationships. So could you imagine this child grows up to be an adult with low self-esteem, low self-worth, personality issues, maybe emotional issues, maybe depression, anger, raging, all these different things. Also, just think of everything that we've talked about. Imagine this child, the amount of abandonment, the abandonment issues that this child has. Imagine the amount of validation this child is going to need as an adult in a romantic relationship with a partner. And it could be very draining. It could be very, very draining. But this is what happens when these children don't get the healing that they need. They don't get the attention that they need. Children grow up to be adults. And just because they grew up doesn't mean that the effects of what happened to them disappeared just because they're grown adults. Now they're grown adults having the issues of their 7-year-old self or their 10-year-old self or their 15-year-old self or all the different ages and versions of who they were as children. And these people show up in relationships. That could be me, that could be you, that could be all of us. We're all carrying our invisible little suitcase of stuff that we've been through that no one could see, but it's there. It's there, guys. We're carrying that suitcase and we bring it into our relationships. So imagine everything we've described here. That was the last one. That was number 7. Imagine everything we described here and the effects that all these 7 different ways of scapegoating a child, the effects that this has on their personality development, on their identity, on how they see themselves within relationships, on their self-worth, on their feelings of helplessness or their feelings of being able to create a life that they truly desire. So I want you to really think about this, and I want to thank you for showing up here today and listening to the entire video. Understanding the dynamics of being the family scapegoat is the first step towards healing and reclaiming one's identity. So if you're someone that has been scapegoated, I just want to really encourage you to do your healing work, start your healing journey, make 2024 the year that the greatest you shows up. Make 2024 the year that you're able to heal, that you're not healed, but you're starting your healing journey. And the more you dive into your healing journey, the more you learn the language, the lingo, and the more you become involved in this type of community, the better you're going to feel and the stronger you're going to get. You're going to start giving more empowering meaning to the things you've been through, such as, it wasn't because you deserved it. It's because your parents didn't do the work that they needed to do. They didn't do their emotional healing. They were emotionally immature and unable to handle situations. And that's very true oftentimes. Often it isn't something as severe as sexual abuse or something like that. Sometimes it's just that our parents are so emotionally immature that they scapegoat us because they don't know what else to do. They basically act our age, and maybe our age, I'm talking about when we're 7 or 8 years old. So I really want to encourage you guys to let's start our healing journey. Be an agent of change for yourself. Be an agent of change for others. Arm yourself with this information. We're living in a world where so much is happening and there's so much abuse. There's so much happening to children nowadays that it is so important for each of us to take responsibility and learn more and more. Thank you so much for being part of my community. And if you like this video, please go ahead and share it with anyone you feel it could impact. And in that way, you're going to be an agent of change as well.